Today, we are going to proceed our workshop with our first speaker, Dr. Shashikant Bhargava, an assistant professor in Department of Pharmacology from AIIMS Gorakhpur. Sir has been an experienced educator for over past 10 years in various best medical institutes of India, such as Lady Hardinge Medical College, VMMC, and AIIMS New Delhi. And with a keen interest in recent therapeutics and drug development, Sir has published several papers on many high-impact journals, and he has also been awarded for Best Poster and Paper Presentation on international conferences. Sir will now be enlightening us on the topic, clinical trial data monitoring. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for the kind words and warm introduction. A very good morning to all. My sincere thanks to the organizers of this workshop from Clinical Pharmacology Unit, JNMC AMU, for inviting me to deliver this talk. And I congratulate all the organizers for coming up with this workshop, which addresses so many interesting topics. And I'll be talking about clinical trial data monitoring, and I hope I'll be able to add to the knowledge and understanding for all the attendees who are present here on this topic. So I'll be talking about this topic on these subheadings. We'll start with the basic purpose of monitoring in clinical trials. We have already seen different types of clinical trial designs, clinical trial phases, ethics committee, and other aspects of which are essential to know for the conduct of clinical trials. As far as monitoring is concerned, we will see what are the various entities involved and what are their roles in the monitoring process. A very important point with regard to clinical trial monitoring is the data and safety monitoring plan. The different standard processes for clinical trial data monitoring will also cover Data and Safety Monitoring Board, or DSMB as you know it, and then we'll summarize. So monitoring, as we all know, is an act of overseeing the progress of anything. So as far as clinical trials are concerned, it basically ensures that the trial is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with certain benchmarks which are mentioned in the trial protocol, in the standard operating procedures for different processes, the good clinical practices, local as well as the international, and the applicable regulatory requirements, again, which varies from for different countries and likewise, right? And this monitoring is an integral component of trial quality assurance process and is critical for GCP fulfillment. So what is the purpose of having this monitoring in clinical trials? So the most important thing is that the rights and well-beings of human subjects, they are to be protected. And when we talk about monitoring, it also tries to address that the reported trial data or whatever observations which we get from a trial exercise, the data that we get is accurate, is complete, and is verifiable from the source documents. In addition, there is a regulatory viewpoint to this monitoring activity also, that is that this conduct of trial has to be in compliance with the certain regulatory requirements, like those mentioned in the protocol or the amendments thereof, or with the GCP guidelines, or any applicable other regulatory requirements. And so that after doing all this, we can get a scientifically valid and meaningful trial data. Okay. So this purpose of monitoring is not just for the, we should not try to see it as a policing activity by regulatory agencies that which sponsors and investigators have to abide by. There is a perspective of trial sponsors and investigators also, which is kind of a positive incentive for trial investigators and sponsors. That is, if they are able to conduct a clinical trial successfully in a and they are able to come up with robust data, be it of positive data or negative data, they are able to take forward that product in the further for further trials phases or for the marketing part of it. So if the trial is not conducted appropriately, or the data is not of a good quality, or there are some safety issues with the patient which have been overlooked during the conduct of clinical trial, it may jeopardize the whole drug development process, which may hamper or which may put some question mark on the drug product later in its life cycle. So from the perspective of trial sponsors, it ensures that the whatever procedures, the trial procedures which are part of the trial protocol are consistent and safe for each participant. There is stringent checks on data collection and procedures which provide quality data and credibility to the trial results, and there is sufficient oversight to help the trial reach its desired objectives, and does not, for example, continue any longer than initially planned due to unforeseen issues which could have been identified during the monitoring process. So it is important for all patient safety, for the regulators as well as for the sponsors and the investigators. Now, what are the entities which are involved in clinical trial monitoring? So we will be talking about in detail about these different entities, but just to have an idea, there are various parts, various elements, various entities which are involved and which try to monitor the clinical trial activities through different means and processes. So any clinical trial site has its investigator, principal investigator, co-investigators, other staff members, the facility, the other infrastructures available in the clinical trial sites, and which is involved in different kind of activities as per the protocol. Now these have all things related to the clinical trials, although the main part happens at the clinical trial sites, but there are other entities like the regulatory authority. Like we have CDSCO here in India, or the ethics committee, which governs, which is a local ethics committee which sees the mainly oversee the safety aspects of the trial participants for that particular trial site. And then we have this CRA. CRA stands for Clinical Research Associate, which we also know as monitor, medical monitor, also addressed sometimes as a medical monitor. And there is then DSMB. So there is a very robust communication as well as exchange of information which happens before starting a clinical trial, during the conduct of clinical trial, and even afterwards between all these entities, and that is just to ensure that the trial is conducted in a proper way. So we'll be covering all these things a bit in detail as we go on in the subsequent slides. So when we talk about trial monitoring, what is to be monitored? You can logically understand it as, first we have to monitor the personals who are going to conduct the trials, principal investigator, co-principal investigators, their credentials, their past experience, what is the facility where the trial is to be conducted, whether it is equipped with all the infrastructures, resources for taking up the participants, to recruit participants, perform procedures as required in the protocol, data storage, or storing the drugs, investigational drugs, or performing any lab investigations as required in the protocol. So all these facilities should be there in the any trial site, and that is to be monitored. And then the methodology, what are the standard procedures which are being followed for enrolling participants, for taking informed consent, for performing any procedures, for administering drug, for monitoring any safety issues with the drug, and what are the SOPs followed for the documentation and reporting of those all the observations and steps in the clinical trials. And ultimately the data which is being generated or which has been recorded, it has to be verifiable and accurate. And so now we come to what are the steps when we first think of clinical trial monitoring. So the first and foremost thing when we talk about, or when we think of clinical trial monitoring, is to have a plan. So there has to be a dynamic monitoring plan for each trial site established before trial begins. Okay, so as this has been also mentioned in this new NDCT 2019 rules also, that it should be a part of the trial protocol, that how they are going to monitor the clinical trial activities. So that has to be mentioned. And as the most common practice is to appoint a CRA or a monitor to oversee this monitoring activities. This is the standard practices for most of the clinical trials. So it starts with the feasibility survey. Feasibility survey means the background check of the investigator of the trial site, and so as to contact the sponsor, contact those trial sites and the principal investigators. They sign a confidentiality disclosure agreement, and then there is a pre-selection, site selection, evaluation, or qualification visit, physical visit. So a part of it is it happens remotely, and part of it is on-site. That is just to ensure that the infrastructure of trial site and the personnel involved is good enough to take up the clinical trial activities. So coming to the monitoring plan part of this monitoring activities, it should be it is appropriate extent and nature of monitoring, which is based upon considerations such as objective, purpose, design, complexity, blinding or open labeling in the clinical trial, the size of patient enrollments, expected risk to the participants, and the endpoints. Now, this also means that there is no one size fit all kind of monitoring plan for all the clinical trials. It varies with different clinical trials and the drug involved, the other elements of the clinical trials. So this sponsor has to come up with the monitoring plans which is appropriate for its trial activities. A monitoring plan must include a general mechanism for reporting adverse events to the ethics committee and as well as to the regulatory agencies. So this must be addressed in a monitoring plan, and these planned monitoring activities are distinct from the requirement for study review and approval by the ethics committee. This has to be seen as a separate exercise from a sponsor's point of view. Okay. Now, what are the key elements which has to be addressed in a monitoring plan? So it should start with a brief description of study design, like what are the primary, secondary outcome measures, endpoints, sample size, target population, inclusion, exclusion criteria. Also must include list of proposed participating sites if it's a multicentric trial. What are the potential risks and benefits for the study participants, procedures for data review and reportable events, roles and responsibilities of the study staff and monitoring entities. Like different monitoring entities can be there. It can like this again. This monitoring activities, it happens even in a simple observational study which we undertake during our say PG thesis, or even as an independent project. If we take up, a principal investigator has to take care of the safety of the participants. He has to take care that whatever data being recorded for it, even if it's an observational study, whatever data has been recorded, it should be verifiable. It should satisfy the different quality standards for a robust data recording, like the ALCOA principle, which we say it should be attributable, legible, complete, right? Like that. So it should be attributable. So so these things happens even in for the simple clinical research, and these are more pertinent, more stringent as when we talk about a multicentric regulatory trial. So these monitoring body can be anything. It can be principal investigator, it can be ethics committee, institutional review board, it can be a medical monitor who has been designated by the sponsor, it can be some other internal committee of experts, or it can be independent monitoring body like DSMB. And there can be multiple entities involved for a conduct of a clinical trials. So this monitoring body can be anything, but the monitoring plan has to mention the roles and responsibilities of all of them. And obviously, this monitoring bodies, which monitoring body has what role, that will depend upon the type of this trial. Content and format of the safety report from the trial activities, data management, quality control, and quality assurance, they all has to be addressed in a monitoring plan. So when I told you that this monitoring plan is not standard for all the clinical trials, like standard as in it's not one sacrosanct plan which can be applied for all the clinical trial, all kind of clinical trials. It has to be optimized based upon disease, the design of the study, the sites involved, what are the study population, whether vulnerable populations are involved, what are the prior safety aspects related to the investigational product, what are the data management system, whether it is keeping the real-time data, online data being maintained for the trial activities, or what are the oversight mechanisms for monitoring the patient risk during the conduct of trials. And based upon these, the sponsor has to come up with a monitoring plan. And this monitoring plan should define what are the on-site and central monitoring activities which are to be conducted, what are the data monitoring and other oversight committees involved in the monitoring plan, and what are the supply and vendor oversight for optimal utilization of the investigation product. Also, these monitoring activities may change over the course of study. So this dynamic monitoring plan for each site is established by sponsor or designated CROs before trial begins. And based upon the projected activity and risk profile of the trial activities, it can come up with traditional monitoring or remote-based monitoring or risk-based monitoring. And again, I like to emphasize, it is dynamic in its nature. So as I have told you that this clinical trial monitor or medical monitor, which are being appointed by the sponsor, they are key elements for specifically for on-site monitoring. So what are the roles and responsibilities of these medical monitors? They are appointed by sponsors and they should be appropriately qualified and trained. Now, as far as this practicality of this is concerned, the monitor qualifications are not defined anywhere. Like the medical monitor has to be has some qualification from life sciences, and he should be experienced in the clinical research and trial activities. That is the most important thing. Then he should be trained for the specific trial protocol. That is the prerequisites which is required for any medical monitor for any particular trial. The monitor is a main line of communication between sponsor and investigator, and the monitor verifies and ensures that investigators of the trial sites is adequate enough throughout the trial period. Medical monitor ensures safe supply, handling, utilization, administration, and disposal of investigational product, ensures compliance to trial-specific SOPs, protocols, and other regulatory requirements during the conduct of trial, and also responsible for verifying that source documents and other trial records are accurate, complete, kept up to date, and maintained. He is responsible for checking the accuracy and completeness of the CRF entries, source documents, and other trial-related records against each other. Any discrepancy which is being found is to be duly reported to the sponsors, as well as it must be discussed with the trial site personnel like principal investigators to address those discrepancies, and maybe at times he may be involved in the training or ongoing training of the trial site personnel. He is responsible for checking the accuracy and completeness of CRF entries. This is very important because that forms the source document for all the even if the trial activities are to be repeated or they have to be verified later on also. Protocol deviations, violations, adverse events, dropouts, they are to be duly recorded and reported by the trial site personnel, and this has to be ensured by the monitor. So we after having a brief understanding of what are the different entities and what is the overall roles and responsibilities of these different entities, let's start with the monitoring, how it happens traditionally. Traditionally in the sense that now there are various aspects of it which are being changed as the technology advances, or we face various challenges in the form of pandemic or other difficult to treat diseases, rare diseases. But traditionally, it is the responsibility of monitor to perform 100% source data verification through on-site visits. This is what is being performed as a part of traditional monitoring exercise. And this frequency of this monitoring, this through on-site visit or maybe sometimes through remote visits, it is determined based on the enrollment activity and other proactive activities like reviewing regulatory documents, protocol training of the site personals, in-depth meetings with the PI to understand any challenges being faced, be it for recruitment purpose or during the conduct of the clinical trials. That has to be that part has to be exchanged between the PI and the sponsor, and this CRA or the monitor acts as a link between both of them. Monitor also helps with the recruitment strategies to so as that trial finishes as per the timelines. There is another risk adapted monitoring, which is more targeted, flexible, and less costly approach. ICGCP defines that extent and nature of clinical trial monitoring should be determined by aspects of trial, including objective, purpose, design, complexity, and other aspects. And according to that, there are various regulatory agencies like in FDA and EMEA and other countries. They have developed their own tools to assess the risk involved in any clinical trials. So they ask sponsors to put up all the details of the trial related activities, what are the intervention involved, what are the prior information related to that intervention, and what kind of populations are involved, whether vulnerable population is involved, whether it is open label or blinded interventions, and like that. And depending upon that, they assign a risk score to the clinical trial. And accordingly, the sponsor has to devise its own monitoring plan, which we can understand as a risk adapted monitoring approach. This also reduces cost and time associated with monitoring while ensuring patient safety and high quality data collection. That, like for example, if say observational study for or off-label use of a certain drugs. So in that case, it may not be required to have a frequent on-site, necessarily increase the expenditure of the sponsors. So it may not be required for that. So if there is a risk adapted monitoring, it is beneficial for the sponsor as well as for the smooth and early conduct of a clinical trial. When we say on-site monitoring, it basically involves 4 steps. That is pre-trial monitoring visit, trial initiation visit, routine or interim monitoring visit, closeout visit. And there are specific elements which are being addressed during each of these on-site visits. Like for pre-trial monitoring visits, it ensures feasibility of the center and the investigator, whether investigator will be able to take up the clinical trial. The trial initiation visit, it delivers the study material, documents, the products, and make sure the investigational team understands the protocol and the GCP requirements. The routine or ongoing interim monitoring visits, which is which happens during when the trial has already been started at a site. It happens periodically, and it makes sure that the study is conducted according to the protocol, GCP, and other regulatory requirements. And any troubleshooting which is required during the conduct after the trial has been started, that those are being addressed during these routine interim monitoring visits. And then there is a closeout visit which happens after the trial has successfully completed or when the trial has been stopped for any reasons, and it makes sure that the investigator file is archived properly and collect back all unused material, documents, or products. Each visit is to be followed by a report, and there is also 4-course visit which is conducted to address any unanticipated issues that arise which require training, remediation, or other situations in which the site requires assistance. It can be mandated by a sponsor or it can be requested by a site also. So this is an optional thing. Now we'll try to see what happens during this each of these visits, what trial site data is being monitored and how it is monitored. The pre-trial monitoring visit is to determine the site's ability to conduct the clinical trial prior to commencement. Sponsor contacts PI and have a predefined agenda. They schedule the meeting, and it is in this visit the sponsor through the monitor visit the site, assess the site, meet with the study staff, and inspect the facilities, and assess the other credentials and other qualifications, other infrastructures available in the site, and accordingly report back to the sponsors. They also sign other confidentiality disclosure forms or other financial disclosure forms, which are as applicable for the different clinical trials. After pre-trial monitoring visit, during the second is the initiation visit, which assures PI and site staff understand the role, their individual roles and responsibilities and regulatory obligations. What are the different protocol procedures, CRF completion, instruction review, requirements for record management, retention, drug handling requirements, enrollment and consent procedures, expedited adverse event reporting procedures, patient recruitment resources, and identifying any potential problems and concerns. And at times, maybe it also addresses the training if it is required for the site personals. This happens after IRB and ethics committee or ethics committee approvals prior to patient enrollment and after all the essential documents are in place and the supplies have been received by the trial site. During this initiation, which formal introduction is being happens between the monitor and the trial site personals. It develops site contact list, which is a list of individuals who are responsible for as a contact person for that particular trial site. Protocol review happens during initiation visit. Review of any adverse events, expedited adverse event reporting requirements, which are specific to that particular trial. Those are discussed between the trial site personals and the monitor. And review any other regulatory obligations and accordingly what are the sponsor and PI responsibilities. It also, this initiation visit also addresses any calibration checks or any infrastructure related document sharing or assessment which has been required for the trial, like if they have the required equipments to store the samples, to store the drugs. So those are also being assessed and ensured during these initiation visits. The responsibilities and sponsor expectations of the staff and ultimately the PI are also explained by the monitor during this, and any key dates or projections for the study milestones, they are also being shared between the sponsor and between the monitor and the PIs. They review the study documentations, drug accountability forms, CRS, logs, delegation logs. Delegation means what are the responsibility of individual trial personals, the site initiation visit training logs, and the site visit logs. Review regulatory binder, which contains all the regulatory documents which are required for the conduct of a trial, signature logs for monitoring and as well as for the accountability. And then there also happens a pharmacy and the site tour. So after this initiation visit happens, the site has to follow up with sponsor or the CRO or on outstanding issues like what are if there are any missing CVs of site personals or lab certification or supplies, missing supplies. And then monitor signs a final site initiation visit report, which has to be kept at the site in the regulatory binder. That this site initiation visit final report has also shared with the sponsor. After this, there is a routine monitoring visit, which again, as I said, its frequency is not as such decided. It depends upon the trial and it review progress of clinical study, ensure protocol adherence, accuracy of data, safety of subjects, and regulatory compliance. And this again has multiple factors on which its timing and frequency depends. Scheduling depends upon the mutual agreement between the PIs and the monitor, and agenda is shared beforehand. It ensures that the regulatory binder is complete and up to date with all the protocol versions and approvals, investigator brochures, lab certification, CVs, licenses, any correspondences it has happened between the ethics committee and or the sponsors, any essays that has happened, and it has to also update the delegation of responsibility and signature log if it has been changed during the after the trial has begun. So document review is very important during these routine monitoring visits. It assures medical records contain all laboratory reports, other X-ray or imaging reports, physician notes, nursing notes, drug compliance administration notes, procedures documenting study parameters reported in CRFs, and informed consent process documentation. Also, monitor has to obtain missing information or document why that any part is not obtained during the reporting of that any participants related source document, if does not contain certain information, that has to be recorded and reported in the source document, that why it was not unupdated. And flag any medical record, flag the medical record to assist retrieval of information in a time-bound manner. All the source document has to be signed by the PI. This also has to be checked during the routine monitoring visits. While reviewing CRFs, it has to be seen that they are complete, accurate, and up to date, and signed by the PIs or other nursing staff as per their delegation duty or as per assigned duties. Adverse events has to be reviewed and assure attribution of event has been documented. Reviewing any concomitant medications or other study medications with their start and stop dates are to be recorded. Pharmacy records also has to be checked. Drug account by checking the drug accountability record forms, assuring drug counts, disposable of returned medicines, and assure notes to file a return for any discrepancies. And PI has to be intimated of any discrepancies which are being recorded, which has been come to the notice of monitor. After the this routine monitoring visit, the monitor meets with PI to share findings, identify any needed corrections, any remedial training required, answer any questions, and also try to set up the next visit. Just after the monitoring visits, site answers queries, clarifications, which can also be done during the monitoring visits, corrected CRF sent to monitor or picked up at the next visit, and monitor sends final monitoring visit report, which has to be again placed in the regulatory binder. After that, monitor sends follow-up letter with confirmation of next visit. So this is how the regular monitoring visits they happens. Now during these regular monitoring visits, the most common deficiencies which are encountered are failure to follow the protocol, failure to keep adequate and accurate records, problems with the informed consent form or documenting the informed consent process. This is very frequently encountered. Failure to report adverse events, and failure to account for the disposition of study drugs. So these are the common challenges which are encountered during the routine monitoring visits, and they all has to be addressed as the trial goes on or the monitoring activities goes on. After the routine monitoring visits, there is this closeout visit, which is to review all regulatory documents, all drug accountability record forms, and review record retention guidelines. This happens after all the trial participants have been enrolled or completed the trial related whatever the protocol as per the protocol, whatever their participation to the extent their participation and follow-up is required, that has been completed, the closeout visit happens. For this, monitor will confirm that all the case report forms are retrieved and queries are completed, destroy or return all the extra CRFs, review sites regulatory binder to ensure consistency with sponsors master file, the trial master file. So all the documents has to be checked for its completeness. Monitor will ensure that all study supplies have been these have been all the medicines or any other supplies that have been returned or destroyed, that all biological samples have been shipped or backup samples destroyed, and ensure that PI has provided ethics committee with the final report from the particular trial site. So monitor should ensure that all the trial site related liabilities, like any communication which has to be happen between trial site and ethics committee or regulatory agency or between the sponsor, they all have been addressed and they have been completed, and documentation of it has been completed duly. At the conclusion of this closeout visit, monitor meets with PI to share findings, review record retention requirements for how long they need to maintain the other records, or if the source documents has to be shared with the sponsor. There, those things are already being mentioned in the monitoring plan. So accordingly, the sharing of documentations and information happens between the monitor and the PI at the time of closeout visit. After the monitor leaves, monitor signs final report, which is placed again in the regulatory binder. And if at times regulatory agency decides to audit the site even after the study has been closed, the sponsor or CRO will then contact the PI, and maybe if the site has certain regulatory inspection being sought by the regulatory agencies, then they can be accordingly planned. Now, apart from these online, this on-site visits, there is also provision of remote monitoring, wherein a sponsor can view sources and complete source document verification can happen via virtual workspace. This is also done because most of the clinical trial data that is being recorded for in today's time, they happens electronically. That they all have an interface on which all the trial data have the day-to-day activity have to be recorded there and there. So this remote monitoring, again, this depends upon the risk involved in the clinical trial side. So accordingly, this extent of remote monitoring can be devised in a monitoring plan. Basically, and more commonly, it is used as a tool to be used in conjunction with risk-based or traditional on-site monitoring. It also involves at times central statistical monitoring, that is to eliminate any source of biases while doing remote monitoring. The statistical plan that how frequently, how much of the data, how much of the case record forms, how much of the adverse events reported, like that, will be remotely monitored. So all these things happens remotely. Something similar to remote monitoring is centralized monitoring. The remote monitoring, this centralized monitoring is done by the sponsors or the CROs for multicentric trials, which identifies any missing data, inconsistent data, data outliers, or unexpected lack of variability and protocol deviations which happens from particular sites, examine any data trend from a particular trial sites, and evaluate for any systemic or significant errors in data collections. So based upon these monitoring activity, they analyze site characteristics and assign performance metrics to each site. They also select sites and process for targeted on-site monitoring based upon these centralized monitoring activities. The monitoring report, which is being finalized at the end of each on-site visit or even after for remote monitoring or centralized monitoring, regular monitoring report has to be generated by whoever is doing the monitoring, be it the medical monitor or anybody designated by the sponsors. And accordingly, that report has to be kept in the regulatory binder or shared with the sponsors and kept as a proper record for future reference also. So this should include the date, site, name of the monitor, name of the investigator, other individuals who have been contacted, and it should include a summary of what is being reviewed and what are the statements and any significant findings, facts, deviation, deficiencies, conclusions, or actions which have been taken based upon those discrepancies or deficiencies. And the review and follow-up of this monitoring report with the sponsor should be documented by the sponsor's designated representative, which is mentioned in the monitoring plan again. And any reports from these monitoring should be provided to the sponsors in a timely manner for review and follow-up. And it should be, the results of any monitoring activity should be documented in sufficient detail. So now we'll try to see what happens with DSMB, what is its actual role in this trial monitoring activities. So this DSMB basically stands for Data and Safety Monitoring Board. It is appointed, it's a group of individuals who have been appointed by sponsors. It is not a mandatory part to have DSMB for all multicentric trials. This DSMB is basically required for mainly for multicentric trial, but it is not mandatory for all multicentric trial. Again, it depends upon the risk involved and the sponsor's discretion that whether DSMB will be useful for that particular site. But at times, a regulatory agency may ask sponsor to have its DSMB. It consists of groups of individuals with expertise. Again, that expertise will vary from trial to trial, and they review on a regular basis accumulating data from ongoing clinical trial, and they monitor trial enrollment, participants' outcome, safety, as well as efficacy, and any other new information from outside the clinical trial which are relevant for the trial, particular trial. They advises sponsors regarding safety of current and future participants and validity and scientific merit of the trial. All these things, who will be the member of DSMB, what will be their qualifications, how they will be appointed, what will be their meeting frequencies, what will be their mandate and responsibilities are predefined in the protocol. Okay, there is a DSMB charter which explains all these things. every aspects of communication between DSMB and sponsor or DSMB or regulatory agencies, what all information will be shared, how it will be shared. All these are addressed in the DSMB charter. The meetings, the DSMB meetings happens like open session or closed sessions. Open sessions can invite outside entities, outside individuals like the PIs from the trial site or any trial site on other trial site personnel, or any experts which is required for a particular issue with the trial site, like some if it is the trial is happening between for on a vulnerable population, say on a child on children, so and there is certain element of related to child safety, so a pediatrician may be called upon for an open session meeting. So DSMB open session meetings involves members other than the designated DSMB members. The closed session meetings happens between the designated DSMB members, and which is kept confidential. The minutes of meeting from the closed sessions are kept confidential, and they are shared with even with the sponsors at the end of the trial. Executive sessions of the DSMB, they happens between the designated members of the DSMB, and they decide upon whether trial has to be continued or not, or any significant decisions which has to be taken. Those happens in the executive session. And of course, for all these closed sessions, executive sessions, quorum of DSMB or minimum requirements of and what will be the voting criteria and how the decision will be taken, all are being mentioned in the DSMB charter beforehand, before the this trial activity happens. The DSMB is also involved in making recommendations to the trial steering committee. Trial steering committee is specifically for major trials, major multicentric trials. It is the overall body which can oversee the trial activities across the different sites, and they have trial steering committee also have representation from the sponsor sites. It can also make recommendations to chief investigator or the sponsor for continuation or early stopping of the trial based on safety and ethical issues. And it also gives monitoring reports to EC or the regulatory agency. Again, this happens. Whatever communication plan has to happen are being decided beforehand in the DSMB charter. Also, there is a part called a sponsors report, which is being shared to the DSMB. It also has closed part and open part, which are again based upon whether it has to be kept confidential or it can be shared with the other entities. So this DSMB have three fundamental functions, that is to review accumulating clinical data relating to efficacy and safety, conduct interim analysis of the clinical data to determine whether the study needs to be terminated for safety reasons, and ensure the continued scientific validity and merit of the study. So you can see this DSMB is just another independent entity, which is whose role and responsibilities are very much similar to what medical monitor has been doing for some other trials, and for that matter, what a principal investigator do for his or her simple observational research. So that is the role of DSMB. It just adds an independent or unbiased element of oversight over the clinical trial activity. It is particularly relevant for trials which involve certain risk elements like mortality and severe morbidities involved as endpoints, high risk interventions, early phase or with vulnerable populations, or in emergency situations. So in these conditions, the DSMB is particularly important. In addition to DSMBs, there is a role of regulatory authorities or inspections and audits, which is also a part of monitoring of clinical trials. Again, which it verifies the quality and integrity of trial data, protects the right and welfare, and it includes inspection of all the personnels as well as the facility infrastructure which are involved in trial activities like investigators, sponsors, monitors, CROs, ethics committee, labs, facilities, GLP facilities, all can come under the purview of these regulatory authorities. So we can see this trial monitoring is an act of overseeing progress of a clinical trial, while this clinical trial audit, which can happen by a sponsor's discretion or by a regulatory agency, it is kind of a systemic and independent examination of trial-related activities and documentations. This is cross-sectional in nature. This audit happens as gives us a snapshot in time of all the subset of participants in the trial activities. The standards or the benchmarks for monitoring or for comparison of the trial activities, they remains the same. The trial activities has to abide by the protocol, SOPs, GCPs, and other regulatory requirements. And each protocol will outline a data safety and monitoring plan, and as far as monitoring is concerned, and these audits are usually unscheduled. It gives, depending upon different regulatory agencies, they give these audit reports in the form of establishment inspection report, which mentions whether no action is indicated, voluntary action is indicated, or official action is indicated from the regulatory agencies on the particular trial sites. So these are all the action steps which can happen based upon the audit reports from the clinical trials for regulatory agencies. And what are the repercussions of these audits, negative repercussions of this audit or monitoring activities? Audit may result in, when this audit, there is adverse audit findings, it can result in disqualification, disbarments, or blacklisting of a trial site or investigator. Whereas for city monitoring, when it is being duly shared with other regulatory agencies or it comes to the limelight, then accordingly regulatory agencies can take actions based upon the this trial monitoring or DS reports of DSMB also. Like that, we have this RIMS or risk evaluation and mitigation strategies or risk management plans. These are mainly these things happens outside India. In India, we don't have as such defined RIMS and RMP strategies, but these are part of actionable things which happens based upon the monitoring activity. So they are strategies to manage and prevent known or potential serious risks which are associated with trial drugs. They can be sponsored or regulatory agencies initiated and can be implemented anytime during a drug's life cycle, and it can involve any element of the trial. Like for FDA recommended RIMS strategies, I asked the sponsor to develop medication guide, patient information sheet, container label, which addresses any safety aspects or any other information related to administration of a trial drug, which are important to ensure the safety of the patient as well as during the investigator during the conduct of a clinical trials. So all these things can be happen or can be devised as per the actionable item from the monitoring activities. As far as India is concerned, we don't have proper RAMs and RMP plans. We have a these are being also not mentioned in the NDCT rules, but medication guide is being used for certain pediatric population formulations. And recently in last year also, this CDSU has mandated all the sponsors to follow this Sugam portal to report any SAEs during the conduct of clinical trial sites. So these are all the part of monitoring actions, actions based upon monitoring activities, which can be employed by regulatory agencies. So to summarize all this entire presentation, the trial monitoring ensures patient safety and basically ensures patient safety and quality data while adhering to local and international guidelines. There is no one-size-fits-all rule for monitoring. It is trial specific and dynamic in nature. Depends upon how the information is being generated from the trial activities or from the drug-related information from other sites or other sources. It involves both internal and external stakeholders, and efficient coordination among them determines the effective implementation. Can be on-site or remote through different phases of trial activities from initial planning to final reporting. DSMBs or regulatory agencies or ethics committees, they all are independent entities that adds another layer to the adequate trial oversight. And appropriate monitoring can guide proactive strategies like RAMS, RMP, and which will further enhance safety of trial participants. So this is all from my side. These are the references which I have used, some of the references which I have used. If you have any queries, you can also email me my email address. Over to you.
Thank you, sir, for such a valuable presentation. And now we will be taking queries from the delegates. Sir, who will pay for the meeting? It's sponsored, then is it not a conflict of interest?
Pay for what?
Pay for the meeting, sir.
For meetings by
yes,
DSMB meetings, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So these that is why the DSMB charter has to be submitted along with the trial protocol. That what are the financial agreements between the DSMB members and the sponsors. If there is any exigencies which is being employed by sponsors to influence DSMB members, they can be beforehand checked and addressed by the regulatory agencies. They can accordingly revert to the sponsors to address that aspect.
Okay, sir. And we have the second question. What is the oversight mechanism in terms of risk assessment in DSMB? And is there any checklist for DSMB in ICH-GCP guidelines and Indian guidelines to monitoring data safety in clinical trials?
So, as far as India is in Indian guidelines are concerned, we don't have defined or what are the checklists that has to be used by DSMB boards. NDCT does not mention DSMB as an entity, but it is an independent board which can be created by any Indian sponsor as well, and he can develop his own mechanisms, own charter, own roles and responsibilities. What will be the checklist it will use for risk assessment of any trial related activities. Other countries they have their defined checklist. They have even on the checklist is available online also, wherein any sponsor can submit the trial related basic details and come up with and get the report as in the trial is a minimal risk, high risk or moderate risk, and accordingly can develop its own monitoring plan. As far as India is concerned, we don't have any well-defined risk assessment method for these trial activities.
Thank you, sir. And one final question, sir. At what time of trial DSMB members meet? And do all the trials need to have DSMB meeting?
No, all the trials do not need to have DSMB board. That DSMB meeting, first meeting can happen before the submission to ethics committee also. That is, it gives us an independent, unbiased opinion to the sponsors also. So at times, sponsors create DSMB board so as the DSMB can have an initial meeting wherein they can decide upon any other element or any monitoring part or any trial related part, say which trial related activity which needs further refinement in inclusion exclusion criteria or any investigation which has to be done. So they can all be even discussed before the trial is submitted to the regulatory authority or the ethics committee. They can also be defined based upon the inputs from the DSMB. So this again depends upon the DSMB charter, how frequently and when do they want to have the meeting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughtful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all.